Last words are crucial. They are essential. They're paramount. The words that we're going to study this morning, spoken by Jesus, are doubly so. They're the final words that he'll say directly to his disciples before his arrest. So they are the last words that he'll speak to them before the cross. Martin Luther wrote about the exact words that we'll be looking at today, and he said this. He said, such a saying as this is worthy to be carried from Rome to Jerusalem upon one's knees. Open your Bibles today to John chapter 16. The Gospel according to John chapter 16. Jesus has been teaching what's known as the Paschal Discourse. It's the longest continuous teaching that we have of Jesus. He reveals these truths between the Last Supper and the Garden of Gethsemane. This, what we'll read right now, is the conclusion of that. It's the conclusion as they approach the garden. John chapter 16, we'll begin reading in verse 31, where it says, Jesus answered them, do you now believe? Indeed, the hour is coming, yes, has now come, that you will be scattered, each to his own, and will leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I want to look at verse 33 in the Amplified Bible, where it says this. Jesus is speaking. He says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have perfect peace and confidence. In the world you have tribulation and trials and distress and frustration, but be of good cheer, take courage, be confident, certain, undaunted, for I have overcome the world. I have deprived it of power to harm you and have conquered it for you. Again, these are the last words of inspiration, comfort, encouragement, and edification to his disciples as a group before his arrest and therefore before his death on Calvary's cross. These words are epic, but they do produce some theological and philosophical, if not practical, tension. Verse 31 particularly poses some questions. Questions like, how do we reconcile the victory of Jesus with the trouble that's in the world? Is it a failure to admit suffering and despair, to admit illness, weakness, struggle? Does that deny the victory of Jesus? Is it a concession that displaces Christ as champion? Where is the power of God when the power of the world sometimes seems so overwhelming? By the way, it's never wrong to ask questions. It's how we learn. Now, there is a difference between questioning and asking questions. There's a difference between being cynical and distrusting and being authentically inquisitive. Maybe you remember the story. Zacharias, the lot falls on him to burn incense in the temple, and so he goes into the temple, and Gabriel, the angel, shows up in the temple and announces to Zacharias that even though he and his wife Elizabeth are advanced in age, even though that they're well past childbearing years, they're about to have a son, and he's going to be the forerunner, and he's going to come in the spirit and power of Elijah. He's going to preach, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. And you know what Zacharias does in that moment? He says, how shall I know this? How shall I know this? You know, every time I think about that, it makes me think of Moses. Moses is talking to a burning bush. The burning bush is talking back to Moses, and Moses still asks for a sign. Zacharias is in the temple. He knows there's nobody else in there but him. But the angel Gabriel has showed up as this massive, shining, bright, brilliant creature telling him these things. And he's saying, well, how shall I know this? In other words, how do I know this is true? And Gabriel takes offense, if you remember. Gabriel says, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. And guess what? I'm going to make you mute for the next 9 months because I don't want what's in your heart, that doubt and unbelief that's in your heart. I don't want it coming out of your mouth and messing things up. And then he goes directly from there to a young girl in Nazareth named Mary. And he shows up, hail, highly favored one, you're blessed. And think about it. He announces a much more impossible situation to her than he did to Zacharias. To Zacharias, yeah, you two are well advanced in years, but you're going to have a child. But he's got to tell Mary, you're a virgin, you've never been with a man, and you're going to have a child. And when he announces that to her, she does not respond. It's similar, but it's not the same. What does she say to Gabriel? She says to him, how will this be, seeing that I know not a man? Zacharias says, how shall I know this? She says, how will this be? In other words, I know it'll be. I know it'll happen. Just tell me how. And Gabriel's not put off by that, not one bit. He gives her detailed information on how this will be and leads her to the place where she says, behold, the handmaiden of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And in the original Greek, they fist bump, double fist bump, and move on forward in faith. It's never wrong to ask a question. However, with God, just be ready for a surprising answer. Jesus says, these things I have spoken to you. He's not just talking about the first 32 verses of John chapter 16. He's not even talking about the whole Paschal discourse, chapters 14 through 16. He's really talking about everything. These things I have said to you, everything. Everything he's ever spoken to them over the last 3.5 years. When John records it, he is saying, everything written in this gospel account, everything, every teaching, every admonishment, every life-giving word, every self-disclosure that a man must be born again to see the kingdom of heaven, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that the thief cometh not but for to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly, that I am the way, the truth, and the life. These things I have spoken to you. If we go back just a few verses, Jesus gives the most concrete and concise summary of everything he ever taught about himself in one verse. Verse 28, look at it with me. Jesus said, I came forth from the Father and have come into the world. Again, I leave the world and go to the Father. Everything that Jesus has taught about himself is condensed in one amazing statement right here. I came forth from the Father. That speaks of his pre-existence, his deity, that he existed before he was born, from eternity past, co-equal with God the Father and God the Spirit. He says, I have come into the world. That speaks of his incarnation. He became visible. He entered humanity. He became flesh and tabernacled or dwelt among us. Then he says, I leave the world. That speaks of his death, his voluntary, sacrificial, substitutionary death, the laying down of his life. And then he says, I go to the Father. It speaks of his resurrection, his ascension, and his intercession. He'll be seated at the right hand of the Father at the place of ultimate authority and power until his enemies are made his footstool. I came forth from the Father and have come into the world. Again, I leave the world and go to the Father. Notice he said, I came forth. Do you know that's an active word? You know what that means? That Jesus is the only person who ever decided to be born. I have come into the world. He who can hurl a universe like you and I can throw a stone, the Creator entered into his creation. So like when he's a baby, right, and he's nursing, and Mary gets done nursing him, she puts him on her shoulder and she helps him burp, like a God needing help to burp. You can't make this stuff up. The wonder of it. Like, why would God do that? Why would he come so far? Why would he go to such incredible lengths, to such depths? Why the incredible condescension? And the answer is his immeasurable love for us. His immeasurable love for you. In Jesus, love came down and the earth stood still. And greater love has no man than this, that a man should give his life for his friends. You see, most babies are born to live, but not Jesus. He was born to die. He entered the world in order to leave it. It's why when we see the newborn Jesus laid in a manger, which was a feeding trough, a manger was not some wooden bassinet. No, it would be an actual rectangular trough hewn out of stone. It would look like a small sepulcher. 33 years later, when Jesus' body is taken off the cross and he's laid in a borrowed tomb hewn out of solid stone, now they laid the baby Jesus in what looked like a little tomb. It would signify that he was born to die. And now he returns to intercede for us. Thank God. Hebrews 7 says it like this: therefore he is also to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. What amazingly great news. Jesus is praying for you. Jesus is standing in the gap for you. Jesus is your advocate with the Father. An advocate was a lawyer, an attorney, how do I say that in Spanish? Abogado, un abogado. How many of you know in the courtroom, if your lawyer's good, you're good? In the courtroom of eternity, in the courtroom of eternal justice, the only courtroom that ultimately matters, you have an advocate who is good, but he's not just good. He's great, he's perfect, he's altogether wise. His counsel is incomparable, his argument is irrefutable. Therefore, the verdict concerning you is in. The verdict before the bench of heaven, the verdict handed down by the judge of the living and the dead. Your verdict is, ready, not guilty. You have been acquitted. You've been released from custody. Whom the Son sets free shall be free indeed. Though your sins were scarlet, he has washed you whiter than snow. Your advocate has won the eternal victory on your behalf for you. It is yours. These things have I spoken unto you. I have told you these things so that in me you may have perfect peace and confidence. In the world you have tribulation and trials and distress and frustration. And everyone living in 2020 said, amen. I love that the Bible never turns a blind eye to reality. Jesus never paints some sort of unrealistic panacea. He says to those who have just walked with him daily for several years in this world, you're going to encounter some major issues. Jesus repeatedly talks about the reality of life in this world. He hasn't been subtle. For instance, he said, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. In this world, betrayers are going to betray, takers are going to take, backstabbers are going to stab you in the back, and haters going to hate. Just know that the world did it to me first. John uses the term the world. He uses the term the world 78 times in his gospel. Fully 1/3 of those to describe the world as a place of unbelief and dysfunction and conflict. The word world is cosmos, and it means the present condition of human affairs in alienation from and opposition to God. The world is creation in a corrupted state. It's the world system. It's the fallen order of things. It's the marred and jaded order of things. The world system is the sphere of creation that lives in rebellion. And in it, Jesus said you'll have tribulation, thlipsis, affliction, anguish, distress, persecution, pressure, and trouble. You will be burdened. Things will not always go the way you want them to go. Your plans will not always pan out. There'll be disappointment. Injustice will occasionally have the upper hand. Change won't come fast enough. There'll be delay. There will be hindrances. People will purposefully procrastinate. There will be abuse and neglect and prejudice and inequity in this world. It's fallen. 1 John says the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. All of creation does. So you will be taken advantage of. You will be undervalued and mistreated. And to say, well, I have faith, so, that won't happen to me. Can I just tell you something? That's a dangerous perspective. That's terribly erroneous, and it'll only cause more heartache when those things do happen to you. Because in this world, adversity and opposition and spiritual warfare are inevitable whether you have massive faith or you have no faith. You have an enemy who is real. And Jesus said that storms happen to everyone. See, you have faith for those things, not to avoid those things. Paul the Apostle said this. He said, we are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Know this. Faith calls things that be not as though they were. Faith does not call things that be as though they were not. Faith doesn't deny the circumstances. Faith doesn't deny the existence of trouble. Faith does not deny that something's trying to derail you. Faith doesn't stick its head in the sand either. Faith is never avoidance or deflection or self-imposed ignorance. But faith does deny adverse circumstances, lack, addiction, disease, trials, troubles, and tribulation. Faith does deny difficult circumstances the power to overtake you, the authority to defeat you. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Let me say it again. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. 1 John chapter 5, verses 4 and 5 says this in the NIV, for everyone born of God overcomes the world. Did you hear that? Everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world? Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. Our faith, believing, trusting in Jesus. Listen, not mere credence, but total reliance. Entrusting your whole self, spirit, soul, and body to Jesus. Standing on his promises, again, does not exempt us from trauma or drama. It doesn't exempt us from confrontation or contentions. It doesn't exempt us from disappointments and frustrations and disillusionment, but it does prevent us and protect us and preserve us from being overcome by them. The enemy might knock you down, but he can't keep you down. Hard times may hit you, but they can't halt you. Trouble might stun you, but it can't end you. It has been deprived of the power to do that. Notice in our target text that Jesus speaks of peace and trouble in the same breath. In verse 33, he says, these things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation. So what kind of peace is Jesus speaking of? Well, one definition of peace is the absence of all enemies and unpleasantries. The other would be freedom from anxiety while dealing with enemies and unpleasantries. Think about it. Like, who couldn't be at peace if there was no trouble? But Jesus teaches and he preaches and he demonstrates repeatedly that what he provides is the more powerful of the two. He provides peace in the storm. Like, it's the difference between just chilling at the office because everybody likes you and your workload is almost non-existent, or maintaining poise and dignity and an even keel, being calm, cool, and collected when the environment is hostile, your inbox is never empty, and the pressure is always on. Former seminary president Donald Miller, concerning this kind of peace, put it this way. He said, this type of peace, serenity in the midst of confusion, is superior to the easier peace because it abides while conquering obstacles rather than avoiding them. Obviously, we're not just talking about a chaotic environment at the office. We're talking about real issues. Life in a pandemic. Real dilemmas, loss, anguish. We might say it's the difference between having peace in 2019 and having peace in 2020. Donald Miller goes on to write, and he says this, as long as a Christian is in the world, he will be pressed as though by a great mob. He will be crushed in spirit as though great crushing weights were lying on his chest. He will know spiritual anguish like that of a mother in labor. This Jesus has told us. When he speaks, therefore, of peace, it is not the peace of unruffled days, but the inner confidence of the warrior who is weary, thirsty, outnumbered, and wounded, but who fights bravely on, confident of the outcome, assured of victory. We are saved not from trouble, we are saved in trouble. Man, I like that. That sounds like somebody's getting real. Rescued in trouble, made whole in trouble. Equipped in trouble, anointed in trouble, not afraid in trouble, not intimidated, confident, fighting bravely on, courageous in trouble, and therefore triumphant in trouble. How do we realize that victory? How do we have peace in the midst of pressure? How do we overcome? Again, verse 33, Jesus says, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." So what is Jesus saying? What's the basis of this encouragement to conquer? Is he saying, be of good cheer. I've overcome the world, so you can too. Is that what he's saying? Because if that's what he's saying, we're in deep yogurt. That is not good news. That would be like the PGA golf pro driving the ball from the tee right onto the green and looking back at you and saying, be of good cheer, because I play golf like that, you can too. It's like the kid who solves the Rubik's Cube in 15 seconds flat and then aces the calculus exam, who turns to the kid who struggles in all things math related and saying, cheer up, I got a perfect score on my exam, so you can too. Man, that only sharpens your hopelessness. That's discouraging. That's depressing. Listen, if Jesus was simply a heroic man who superachieved a superior life, if he was only a stellar example of what we hope to be, then his example has no value for us. Jesus' example of superior humanity simply makes our inferiority more apparent and unbearable. But if Jesus is more than a human, if he is indeed the Son of God who overcame the world, not simply for his own sake, but for our sake, that if his victory in his life can become victory that we can appropriate, that we can experience, a victory freely given to us when we embrace him in faith, then his triumph becomes our triumph. I always think of this illustration. It's like you get abducted somewhere and you get carted off to a remote place in the desert and you're told the following: you now have to run a race. And you're running against someone that you can't see. But you have to run a race, and it is a race for your life. The one who wins will live. The one who falls short and doesn't win will die. It's kind of got a Hunger Games feel to it. And after being given that short explanation, they say, ready, on your mark, get set, go. And the gun goes off. What are you going to do? You got to start running. It's the race for your life. And so you run over rocks, you run on sand, you run through trails, you run up so high that the air gets thin, the oxygen gets depleted, it's cold, and then you run down to where it's hot in the valley, and you've got to go over different brooks, and you slip, and you cut your knee, and your knee is swollen, but you got to keep running, and then you run through the woods, and a low-hanging branch hits you in the eye, your eye gets bruised and blackened, but you got to keep running, so you keep running, you're exhausted, you're weary, you're beaten, you're bloodied, you're bruised, but you have to keep running until finally there's a clearing and you see it's the end of the race, but as you approach, the tape has been broken. Someone else won. And so as you make it through, you look at the winner's circle, and there he is. You're beaten, bloodied, and bruised. He's hardly broken a sweat. And he's in the winner's circle. You're escorted to the loser's circle. The light goes on the winner's circle. Everyone applauds, and he is crowned. This champion is crowned with the victory crown. And everybody bows in homage. And then they turn their attention to you. And you are bound and led to where you're about to be executed. And as they ready the guillotine, suddenly there's a voice from the winner's circle that says, "Wait! Stop everything." And the crowned champion leaves the winner's circle and enters into your circle. And he walks up to you, and in front of everyone, he takes off the victor's crown, and he places it on your head, and he looks into your eyes and says, "I won it all for you. And now I take your place. I will die the death that you should have died so that you could have life and have it more abundantly and eternally." You see, now we've got good news. Now we've got genuinely good news. Be of good cheer. I have run your race and won it for you. I have fought your battle on the same battleground where you must fight. I have faced your enemy and vanquished him. I have routed your foe. I have done for you what you could have never done for yourself. I have won the victory for you, and I will do it again and again and again in you and through you. Abide in me, and my victory is yours. Two keys. Look at that verse one more time. Verse 33, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Your victory is not dependent on your pedigree, on your possessions, or your portfolio. Your victory is guaranteed because of your position in Him. Again, in the Old Testament, two armies that were ready to go into battle with one another, they would choose a representative. They would choose, there was a technical term, it was called the archegos, which meant champion, and that champion was their best fighter. And if that champion won against their best that the enemy could put forth, if your champion beat him, well, then the entire army won, the entire nation won, really the entire people won. You remember when David defeats Goliath, all Israel is in David, so all Israel gets the victory. Jesus is our champion. Whatever he achieves accrues to you. Whatever he wins is credited to your account. That's what it means to be in him. His triumph is yours. And all the spoils of war are yours. Remember how the Amplified put it? "For I have overcome the world. I have deprived it of power to harm you." Somebody needs to hear that this morning. Jesus says, "I have deprived it of the power to harm you." What's trying to harm you cannot harm you because of the victory of Jesus. "I have deprived it of the power to harm you and have conquered it," look, "for you." Jesus is saying, in me, you have peace in the midst of a very messy and misguided world. You have supernatural patience to wait out a pandemic and get to the other side. You have dominion over every enemy that seeks to destroy you. You in him have superiority over every foe. The New Testament says, in him you are justified. In him you are righteous. In him you are established. In him you are always led in triumph. You are a new creation. In him you are chosen. You are raised up. All your needs are richly supplied in him. In him you live and move and have your being. You reign in him. Your life is hidden in him, and you are inseparably and unconditionally loved, just as the Father loves the Son, in him. Your victory is guaranteed because of your position in him. And the second key is this. Jesus says, "Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Now, this is something that can definitely get lost in translation. Be of good cheer in the ancient world did not mean be cheery. It didn't mean cheer up. It didn't mean, oh, shucks, be happy. That's not what it meant. Be of good cheer is the word tharseo, and it means to have courage, to be bold, to be confident, to dare. Jesus is saying, in essence, if you want to live in victory, if you want to be able to thread the needle into the true riches, if you want to be able to hit a grand slam when life throws you a curveball, if you want to realize the benefits that are freely given to you from the fact that I have conquered the world, then you'll have to, number 2, dare courageously. To be fearless, to have inner fortitude, to be strong and of a good courage, to embrace valor and intrepidity, to be resolute and stout-hearted. Soren Kierkegaard wrote, "To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself." It's like the biggest risk is often not taking one. We're talking about a sense of determination and tenacity. We're not being spiritually wimpy or fragile, but having spiritual backbone and Holy Ghost grit. Proverbs says, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. We're talking about contending for the faith that was once delivered to us. Listen, let me ask you a question. Are you a pretender or a contender? Because you can't be both. Are you a whiner or a winner? Do you cower and complain and play it safe, or do you dare greatly? That's one of my favorite extra-biblical quotes. Teddy Roosevelt. He said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." The Apostle Paul said it like this in Ephesians 3 in the Amplified Bible, "In whom, because of our faith in him, we dare to have the boldness, courage, and confidence of free access and unreserved approach to God with freedom and without fear." What is Paul saying? What's the Holy Spirit saying? What is Jesus saying? For all intents and purposes, the Lord is saying, you are in the world, but you are not of the world. But I did not take you out of the world. I have left you in the world to be the salt of the earth, to be the light of the world, to be a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. So dare to be different. Dare to go against the grain. Dare to rise up. Dare to possess the gates of your enemy. Dare to reject the lies. Dare to believe. Essentially, God, through his word, is saying, dare to believe. Dare to believe in who I have revealed myself to be. Dare to believe in my presence with you always. Dare to believe in my power flowing in you and to you and through you. Dare to believe in my promises manifesting in your marriage, in your children, in your children's children. Dare to believe in my never-ending, never-failing love for you. And what I'm saying to you today is, I dare you. I double dog dare you to believe that in him your addiction is conquered. I double dog dare you to believe that in him your depression is conquered. Your disappointments are conquered. Your feelings of unworthiness are conquered. Your past has been conquered. Your present is full of promise, and your future is secured. I double dog dare you to believe that your faith will become sight, that the waiting is making you wiser, that the delay is not denial, that your God is faithful and his promises and his power will manifest in you. Man, I said it Thursday night, but let me say it again this morning. I double dog dare you to believe that you will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living, that goodness and mercy will follow you all the days of your life, that he will satisfy your mouth with good things, that he daily loads you with blessing, and your cup runneth over, and that in him you are who he says you are. You have what he says you have, and you can do everything He said you can do, and that because He has overcome the world, you are more than a conqueror in Him.